Hi everyone, welcome to the topic Flask Basics. So we will start with introduction to Flask framework and how to set up a Flask application. So in the last video we have discussed about web and API fundamentals, what is a client and what is a server, what is HTTP protocol, what are the different HTTP methods and what is an API in general and what is REST API and how a API request or a HTTP request and HTTP response looks like and what is the request line, headers, body, and what are different status codes provided by the server. Okay, so we all covered these topics in a clean, crispy way theoretically. Now let's look into this action from practical perspective. So for that, we will be introducing a Python web framework called Flask. So it is a Python library. You need to install this library. Okay, so for what purpose you will be using this library? To build web applications. So you can create servers using Flask, and then you can create routes using Python functions, and you can also design UI using Flask templates. I mean, in the Flask you can integrate HTML templates, CSS and JavaScript and images, such that you can also start building UI also for your web application. And yes, you can also build REST APIs. So Flask is used to build an end-to-end web application. So it is a lightweight Python web framework. So there is also a other framework available in the market, web framework in Python called Django, but this is very large. It is used for large projects, and it is, of course, it will take a lot of time to learn about Django, and it is not that straightforward. Since we will be using in GenAI applications, Flask is good enough. Okay, so let's start hands on Flask first. So Flask, by default, using Flask you can create REST APIs. Okay, but just for the information perspective, there is also a fast APIs, but we'll be not using this. Using Flask, we'll be using fast API in GenAI applications. So just from the information perspective, I'm just introducing few things here which will be seen in GenAI phase. Okay, so now to install Flask, what command you need to do? Pip install Flask. Okay, so first you need to open this Jupyter notebook file from your environment. Okay, and then, okay, so let me show you. Yeah, so you need to activate. So I created a virtual environment env week 3. I have activated it, and then I am launching this application, and I'm launching the Jupyter notebook. Let me go to the correct directory first. 1.3. Yes, okay. So I am my Jupyter notebook is launched from the console after activating the environment. So now I am installing pip install Flask. Okay. So this is how it will be installed, and finally you will tell successfully installed Flask 3.1.3 version. Okay. So now this is our first practical application, practical use case. This code, whatever you are seeing in the Jupyter console, it creates a server, a web server. Okay, so using Flask you can create a web server. We have already seen what is a client and what is a server. Okay, so we are creating a server here, and my server has only one route here, which is called home. Okay, so let me explain you what is route and what is this. So you have your website myga.com. Okay, so this is my home page. So whenever I launch this application, so this request from my application goes to the server and I get this landing page. If I click about, so if I click about, what will happen? This it is showing here slash about and slash products. So like that, if you have multiple tabs in your web application, you need to define multiple routes in the server. So for each route, a request will go to the server separately. So here what I'm doing is I'm creating a web server using Flask library, and my server has only one route. Okay, so if a user requests if user is requesting a home page, so this route will be get activated, and this function will be getting called home, and this text will be returned to the application. So this is a response from the server. So how, so just like from the, from as a client, you need to talk to the server, but I am talking using this route. So later example we'll see how to build different routes, but for example, as of now, to keep it simple, I have one server. I have a server running locally, okay, and my server has only one route. So under that route, I'm defining a Python function called home, and whenever this slash is called, automatically this home function is called, and then this returns this text to the client application. Okay, S- so let's run this code. So to run this code, you should run this from the Python console. So here I will go to the Python console. So let me start. So Python app.py. Okay. So here I am, my server is running. So where the server is running, my server is running on local host. It is not, it is, my server is locally running on my computer. And in order to talk to the server, you need to use this HTTP IP address, and this is the uh, port address of my server. Okay, so I'll just repeat again. So I have created a server. So what is a client and what is a server, you know. So now I have created a server. So what does my server does? If any request comes, it will just respond, welcome to Flask, this is my home page. Okay, so my now after app.run will launch my server. So my server is running now. So how to talk to the server? Okay, my server is running. This is the way I talk to my server through, this is the IP address of my server, because I don't have I'm not hosting my server publicly. So this is my, this is how I talk to the server. If google.com, let's say for example you have google.com, so you are talking to google.com server. Okay, here I am 127.00.1 colon port number, I am talking to a server which I have just created. Okay, so how do I talk to the server? You can just click this, okay, control, and then you click this. Yeah, see, welcome to the Flask, this is the home page. So this is the response coming from the server. Okay, see, I am talking to the server from a client. So a client can be a web application, a client can be a Python code, a client can be a Postman. So I am not designing any UI here. So I have a server, I want to talk to the server. Since it is a web server, I need a web application to talk to the web server. So web application, so this is my client. So via client, I am talking to the server. I don't have UI in my client. Okay. So just to fall back, what we are talking here is, yeah, so here using Flask, I have created a server, and this server, instead of running on cloud, it is running locally. What is my server IP address here? 127.0.0.1. So my server IP address is 127.0.0.1, and the port number is here 5000. This is automatically created by Flask. Okay, so now how do I talk to the server? So using a client, you don't need to build a client application, because web browser by default it's a client. You can open a tab and then you can just type this error. So since I'm not using any routes, it's just slash, it is by default goes to the server. So this request now, so this request will now go to the server. So in the server, if there is no, what is the base method that will be called? So I am calling home. So what it will return? Welcome to Flask. This is the home page. So I am getting this text here. Okay. So hope your concept is clear. So using Flask, I created a server. Server IP address is 127.0.0.1, and the server port number is 5000, and I am talking using a web client. This is my web client and I am talking to the server. to talk to the server, you need to give the server IP address and the server port number. And if you just click enter, what happens here, it is a request is going to the server. So in the server, if the user request any without a plain, just if he just enters the server without any route, just like this, then it will call this function home and you will be returning this text. Okay, so that is what we are seeing here in this page. So please be careful. Don't confuse with client and server. So this is just my client. I don't have any UI in the client as of now. I just created a server and I'm just talking to the server. That's it. Okay. So typically you will be having UI also. So see templates, index.html, about.html, style.css, script. So we'll be slowly building UI also. The client application also will build slowly. Okay. So yeah, so for now we have this just app.py only, which is running locally on my machine. So that is the server I have created now. I am just talking to the server using client. So now let's move on. Yeah. Yeah. So that's about the how to install Flask, how to create a sample server, and how to talk to a server using a web web client. Since I have created a web server. Okay. Now let's start discussing more about routes. See, from technical perspective, what is a route? It is a URL pattern that maps to a Python function. Okay. So in the last class, in the last lesson, we have seen, okay, HTTP localhost 5000. It is mapped to that this URL is mapped to a home function. Okay. So now, for example, assume user request like this from a web browser. So or a client, web client. So what happens? It talks to the server, Flask server. Okay, user requested slash about. So this particular @app.route about will be called from the Flask. Okay. So while calling this function, there is it calls this function def about. Okay. So this about will return this text to the client. Okay. So what is the route? It is a URL that maps to a Python function. So this is the URL. So what is my URL? Localhost. So I'm talking to the server, but I'm adding slash about. It means this request comes to the server. Okay. The Flask finds, okay, user is requesting this. So it goes and finds route slash about. So once it finds that route, so what a function will be there under that route. Okay. So that function will be getting called and that particular response will be sent to the request or to the user or to the client application or web application, because that is very simple definition of route. So we already seen a basic route. So like this is what we have seen in the last class. Like, okay, if user just simply enter, just talk to the server or just to the very home page, it returns welcome home. Okay. So next, let's see how to, if there are more routes in the Flask server. So I'm defining different routes, slash about, slash contact, and slash main. So do not confuse. This is not a client code. This is a server code. Okay. So I'm not designing any web application as of now. I am creating a server, and in that server I am defining routes and I am testing those routes with the help of a web application. Okay. So these are the different routes now. So how to test this? So let's go to, so these are the routes actually. So now let's test this. So let's open this. Let me open Python app example.py. Okay. You see my app is running now. So if you go to localhost 5000, yeah, it says welcome home. What are the other routes available here? Example, in app 1 you have slash about and slash contact. So let's call this. Okay. So slash about, you see it is coming about us. And if you see, what is the one more route we defined? Slash contact. Okay. So now let's talk to that routes. Slash contact. Contact us. See, here I am not I'm, yeah, please don't take me wrong. I am emphasizing on this point here multiple times because it is clear to understand here. I am not creating any web application or a UI here. From here, I am talking to a server, and that server has different routes or different information. Okay, so one route is slash about, and one route is slash contact, and one route is slash. So if you design a web application, then you need to see, okay, if I click this tab, if I click that, for example, you see here, right, myga.com. So here, if I click this tab, so this request is going to the server, and since I already have a web application, I am seeing the UI here, but all this text and everything is coming from the server. Maybe images and all these things, because of my UI application, it is coming. Okay. So here, all I am doing is I am talking to the server using a web application. My web application is dummy, doesn't have any UI. I'm just talking to the server like this. Okay. Just trying to understand the concept of routes. Okay, so if you give slash contact, it will which Python function will be called. If you give slash about, which Python function will be called. So just trying to understand how to talk to the Flask web server using a web application. Okay, so that is about routes. I mean, basic routing. Okay, so now let's look into other routes where we have parameters also. So here I am not only defining slash user, I am also passing some parameters, name and slash post int colon post id, and profile username int colon user id, temp float Celsius, and I'm running this my Flask server. So I have created one more Flask server now, and this running locally. Now this Flask server have different routes, and apart from having routes, it also has uh, more parameters to the route. So name is one parameter. So what happened here? If you call from the client, if you call this route user slash any name, this function will be getting called. So you can pass variables to your Python functions also from client application. Okay. So now let's run this. So then you will understand what we are talking about. So I just stopped this. So Control C. See, you can also directly. Now let's run this example2 Python app example2.py. Yeah, here you're already getting. See here, this is user, and I am passing this parameter Maya. So what happens here is, okay, so from UI, for user requested, user is talking to a server using localhost, or you can also put here 127.0.0.1, and the server port number is this. So what is the route user, and one more parameter I am passing to the route is Maya. Okay, so this request goes to the server. Okay, it comes here, and what happens here? The Flask finds, okay, what is that route with slash user and this slash name. So this name Maya is sent here, and it is returning hello Maya. So that is what you are seeing here. Okay, so now let's run one more route, post 42. Okay, so here what is happening? Okay, this request, it is going to this server. So post, okay, Flask finds post, and the ID I'm passing is 42, which is integer. So I'm telling post ID 42. So same thing I'm doing it. So now let's talk to the server through a different route, John 123. So here what is happening? My route is profile. Okay, so Flask finds any route that starts with profile, and I am passing two parameters to the route. So John as well as 123. Okay, so this information is passed to this Python function, and I'm returning this profile username John and ID is ID. That is what I'm seeing here. Okay, so all I'm trying to do is I have created a server, and I have created multiple routes to that server, and I am testing those routes using a web application, and my web application or my client application doesn't have any UI at this point. Okay, so now let's call this last function Celsius temperature. Okay, see here I'm trying to tell two concepts here. So one is, yes, I got an error. It is telling the request URL was not found on the server. So it is throwing some error. So why? because here it found, okay, temperature. It found this route, but this route is expecting a parameter float, and you passed an integer. So that's why this it is complaining. So now how to call that function? So if we say 25.0, see 25 degrees is equal to 77 Fahrenheit. What is happening here? Okay, this function is called, and I'm converting my centigrade to Fahrenheit now. Okay, so this is what happening when you are running this particular route. You should to pass float parameter. Okay, so now let's run one more example to see how to handle errors in routes. Okay, see, let me stop the server. To stop the server, you need to press Control C. So the server got stopped. So now let me, so now I have a one more example where I am talking about, I'm creating a server name is app, and in my server I don't have any routes, just a default route slash. So when this it is when the default route is called, I am returning home page. Okay, so for example, if I passed anything like invalid or any other things, any other route which is not defined, what error will come? 404 will come or server error will come? Which error will come? So to handle that error, if any routes I am entering which is not defined in the server, to handle that exception, we need to define at the rate app dot error handler, at the rate app dot error handler. Okay, so this is the Python function decorator function you need to use, and here you need to pass. Okay, so which exception? This is like a try and exception, something similar you are doing here. You are handling different errors. If that route is not there, what error, what is the exception I need to catch, or what is the error I need to take care? Okay, page not found. So let's run this example now. Okay, so I will run example 3 dot, okay, Python app example 3.py. Okay, so this is my server now. So I am talking to the server using a web application. Okay, it says home page. So now let's say I gave slash about. What will happen now? See, page not found. For not the page you are looking for does not exist. It means the server is complaining. Okay, there is no such route because I have only one route. That's why it's not getting here. Okay, that's why it is catching this exception. This is catching this error, and I am returning that page not found 404. The page you are looking for does not exist. Okay, so this is about what is a route, basic route, and how to define multiple routes, how to test that routes using a web client, because we're creating a web server using Flask, and how to pass parameters to the route, and how to handle the errors from the server, or how to handle error invalid requests from the user. Okay, so yeah, this is about route handling. Now let's start understanding more about routes, what we can do with routes apart from passing parameters to the route. See, let's go back to the basic example. See, here I have a server. So I am making one request with a route like slash about. So what is happening here? That request is coming to here, and then you are sending the response. But that request is a HTTP protocol. Okay, so one CRUD operation should be definitely called. So which HTTP method is called, we will check that now. So what I am trying to tell is, if you go back, so if we go to, yes, go to this web basics. See, by default, if you are making any request, you are getting the response back. But by default, either of these four methods should be called from your client application, whether it is read or create or update or delete. So, but we will be not using this here, that we will be using this specific way in using the REST API. But internally, what happens in a regular HTTP request? Okay, let's see that now. So here, what I am trying to say is, so if you click this slash info, so what happens here is the server will trigger this function, and then you will be returning this. So which HTTP method user request, you can print using request dot method. So apart from importing Flask, you also need to import one more library called request from Flask. Okay, Flask you already installed. So what is the concept here is, I am dealing about routes. I am understanding what more information can routes provide to me. To me means here for a client or to the client application. So what I'm trying to do is I'm talking to the server using a route slash info. So what happens is, as we discussed, internally a HTTP method should be called. Okay. So which HTTP method is called, we don't know, but we can get that info. It is internally taken care by the Flask framework. You don't need to add this get, put, all those things. So that will be part of designing a REST API. Okay. So for now, what we will see how to do what which method is called from the client. Okay. So for that, I am creating three routes: slash info, slash search, and slash headers. So apart from knowing which method is called, I am also adding what is the route request dot path. So here also I am adding few what we can do with this request library. So here I can also print request.org get query default. Okay. So we'll see when you run this example what is. So from the web application, if you type search slash column q is equal to value or some what is the search, we will see what is happening. So that request comes to here, and you can also know which query user has requested. So in other way, what I am telling is I am handling my request inside the route. So the server knows all the details about the request, which HTTP method it is using, and which path the user requested, and what is the query he made. So the server has full control over the user request. Okay. So here I am handling slash headers. So you can also tell from which browser user is making. So request your browser user underscore agent. Okay. So headers dot, for that you need to call request dot headers dot get user agent. And to get which search user is telling, you need to use request dot args dot get. To tell method, you need to use request dot method. To tell the path route, you need to use request dot path. So where is this request is coming from? Flask. Okay. So these are the other things also you can play with the request. We'll see one by one. Okay. So when you run the code, you will clearly understand what I am talking. So let's run the first example, Python. Yep. Okay. Here my server is running. My server is name is app. So let's see. I will call this function. Okay. So I am talking to server from a client, and I am talking slash info. Okay. So I am talking to a server with the help of a web client. There is no UI on the client, and I'm calling the path slash info, and the method which used the HTTP method which is using internally is this get method is called. So that is what I'm seeing here. Method is get, and the path you use slash info. So you can just kind of, I'm telling what else you can do in routes, using routes. You can get all the information, different type of information from the request also. Okay, what is what kind of request, what method is called. This is kind of like more of a debugging. They're kind of telling more details. Okay. So now let's run one more example. So let's close. And what is that one more route we define? So it is slash search slash name is equal to value. Okay. So what to do for the slash search? Okay. Slash question, or okay, let me do one thing. So I'll just close this. In my console, that route is already there. So yeah, here I am now launching this. So slash search colon q is equal to Python. So when this request is sent to the Flask web server, what HTTP method we are using? We are using get, because we are getting information, we are fetching information from the server, and it is also telling user searched for Python. So let's see how we are getting this output. So when search slash search is there, this particular route is called, and in our request, since we already passed arguments slash question mark q is equal to Python, that is part of argument, you can just capture those arguments like this request.args.get. Okay. So what is happening here is I am passing the request method is get, and the what query I search for Python. Okay. So if I'm not entering anything, it will tell default. So let's see that. Okay. So let's just run just search. It is telling get method is used, and you didn't query for anything, you just default. But if I mention anything like question mark q is equal to Python, yes, it will tell okay, I am searching for Python. Or instead of Python, I can also use any other word. I can use GenAI. Okay, the query I'm doing is GenAI. Okay, so the server, Flask web server, apart from giving response, it can also capture details about the request. It knows what user is request, what he's trying to search. So it's very good to know like what is the user intent here. So one last thing we'll see is user. So okay, what browser user is telling. See, these are all function decorators. Okay. So let's run that too. So let me close this. Let me open my console. Let me open this headers. Yes, see. So this is it is telling the now I got a request from client. So the method used is get, and the user is requesting from Chrome. So I'm using Chrome actually, but it is printing all the browsers actually present on my local machine also. Okay, which is good. So using routes, you can use basic routes, you can use multiple routes, you can pass parameters to the routes, and then you can also search, or you can use this request library to know about the information about the client request, different things like what is a method that is called internally, what is a query, what is the browser user is using. So all those things you can get sent to server is able to tell. Okay, which is quite interesting. And every time we are seeing text here, so can my server respond in a different format? Is that only the text I am seeing? Okay, so let's see now. So I will run this one more example. uh, Let me stop this current server and let me run example 2 dot py. Here I am again launching my example. So it is telling text. So I'm calling this request. Yes, by default get method is called internally. I'm not printing it. And then server is responding. This is plain text because here the route is text and this is getting called. So now I will give this route. What happened to HTML? Okay. So slash text. So the response from the server, it also contains an HTML also. See, because I am defining this. This is not a string actually. This is a HTML. So everybody knows about HTML programming, assuming. So I will not go details about what is this HTML, what is this body, what is all those things. I'm assuming everybody knows HTML programming. So here the header is this is hello from HTML, and the para is this is from HTML. So this is not this is converted into HTML. So you are seeing here my heading, and this is my para. Okay. So the server can also respond in the format of HTML also. Flask web server. Just want to show that too. So let's call one more route slash API slash user. So if you call this route, if you make this request to server, what server finds this and it will return a JSON data also. So for that you are using JSONify. So this is how you return this entire user data as a JSON format to the client. So let's see that API slash user. So instead of HTML, I can use API slash user. You can see now my information is coming as a JSON format. JSON is a structured string. Okay, we already seen that in the examples. So yeah, so this is about a response. So the response, you can get multiple response types: JSON, HTML, plain text from the server. Okay, so here again I'm repeating, I am just created a server and I am playing with the routes. And in order to test it, I'm using a simple web client, my web browser I'm using. And what all we can do with the routes we are seeing here. Okay. So next is about status codes. Yeah, this already we saw, like if you give any bad route, it will throw this error 400, 500 like that. So that's why I'm not running this example, just straightforward. Based upon the route, it is throwing different errors. Okay. So that's all about the how to handle different requests and responses. Okay. So now let's start building our client application with a little bit of UI introduction. So this is my Flask project structure. I have app.py, which is my server. We already have seen multiple examples like routes, how to use routes with parameters and request, response, everything. So now I'm expanding my structure now. So I have a templates folder where I have three HTML files and I have a static file which has a style.css. Okay. So this is just I kept for future information, but I'm not having any JavaScript and images as of now. See, this is my project structure. Okay, I have app underscore example.py, and both these examples are using this static and templates. First example is using templates. Second example is using static. Okay, so what is there inside templates? I have three HTML files. Home. So this is one HTML file, style, and then user. Okay, so this is my web page. So this is a HTML web page. I am not defining any. This is like designing a new way, but I'm not putting more like book tabs, buttons like that, but just a simple UI. Just to tell you from the concept perspective, like using Flask, you can not only design server code using Flask, you can also write front end code or UI code, but you need to use a concept called render template. See, you cannot define like this. Okay, it is if the web page is like 100 150 lines, you cannot define everything in the server code. The rendering will be very bad actually. So what is the easiest way? It's templates. So you need to define some UI code using a library called use render template. So in Flask, you have a build one more class called render template. Using this, you will be integrating the HTML files. Okay. So who is responsible for integrating these HTML files onto your client application? It is called Jinja 2. So Jinja 2 is a template engine, so that allows HTML files and some conditional. So various things you can render onto your client application. So today, now in this lesson class, what we will do is, okay, so I am creating a server application, but so this server also returns some UI. So using this render underscore template home.html. So this home.html is already a web programming page. HTML, I'm not going to tell okay what how to design web. So it comes under web programming. So there is a HTML file which loads some UI, and I have a one more HTML file called user.html. So I am using this render.template. So what happens is whenever user requests this particular path on the screen, you will also see UI apart from response. Of course, this response is sending from server only, but the HTML files are already predefined. I am not developing any UI here. I am just reusing or I am integrating those UI files here. Okay, so now let's run this code here. So let's go to this particular path. My environment is activated. So Python app underscore example1.py. Okay. So my server is running. This is my server. I am talking to my server. You see now, by default, this is my client application now. So my client application has some UI. Of course, this is very just to show the concept perspective. So this is written. I'm getting an HTML web page is loaded now. So into the Flask application. So this is like a web application now. I have a front end, I have a back end, but I am loading the using with the Jinja 2 rendering engine. I am rendering my UI screen here. Okay. So I am loading the HTML files in very simple terms. What you can do is I am loading UI code from Flask using or from web server using render template. This render template internally uses Jinja 2 engine to render. Okay, so now let's call one more route which says profile slash name. So for example, if I call, okay, let me close this. I can open this. Yeah. So there is a one more thing called profile slash. Okay. So yeah, let me open that again. Okay. So this is my home page. So what is the one more word? Slash profile slash name. If you can pass any name. Okay. So I'm calling a, I'm making a request profile slash allies. Okay. So let's see this. So it is telling my profile is allies, age is 25, email. So this is like UI. You are getting this information. This is a HTML rendering. This is not a text or anything. Okay. So using Flask, you can not only develop server code, but you can also integrate front end code or UI client application code into the server also. Okay. So that is a major advantage you have using the Flask. This point is very important. Okay. So render template is the syntax and you need to import that. Okay. Render template from Flask. We already installed Flask in the beginning of the module. So this is about rendering HTML page. So now how to render static files. Okay. So yeah, this is all just telling you understanding HTML directly from Flask. Yeah, this is just all a bit covered. So now let's see how to render a static file, CSS or JavaScript. These are all static files. Okay. So yeah, how to render in this project? I have a CSS file. So let's CSS means like it is a style sheet. Okay. So I am having this file here, style.css. This is what I am having. Okay. So I am loading this CSS file. So let's see what happens now. So I'm closing this server. So how do you render static file? Same, render template style.html. Okay. So this style.html is using my CSS. If you go to this particular thing, static, no, okay. Templates, yeah, this style.html. So this is using internally using CSS file. Okay. So if I open that HTML page in Notepad, you can see. Okay. So now let's how to see how to use both HTML and as well as CSS file, static file, and how to render UI. Okay. So now let's run this example. So for that I come here, I already killed my existing application. So this is example 2. Okay. Let's run it. Okay. So let's launch. I'm talking to the server. So yeah, so this is my styled page. You see this is a UI. So this UI I have already written using web programming using HTML and CSS, and I am integrating that into a Flask application. Okay. So I am rendering that UI with the help of Flask code or with the help of Flask server code with the help of routes. Okay. So you can see slowly we are building a web application here which has UI and which has server code, which has now client code, and we are rendering client into the server. Okay. So yeah, so that's all about rendering or how we use render template. One last thing, URL slash for. Yeah. So yeah, this is why this is imported. Yeah, I think this is just a additional piece of code which you're not using this library. Yeah, you can just remove this also, not a problem. And now, yeah, so that's about rendering UI or rendering HTML files, CSS files onto your client application. Okay, so this is a dummy button. So I'm creating buttons now, and I can create all lot of things, whatever your how your UI should look like. Okay. Okay, so now let's stop this. So let's start adding more UI stuff. So here I will be building an HTML form. So using this HTML form, I will be sending data to the server. So I have two forms here. So HTML form, this is one which is called as contact form, and this is one more HTML form called feedback form. See here I can fill the data and then send the data to the web server, and web server receives the data and then sends the acknowledgement back. Okay. So same for the feedback form. So here I have a drop down menu where I can have select what is the rating. Okay. So let's see that in action. So here I have two forms. So the forms are already been designed in HTML language. So yeah. So this is my contact form. So here I have name, email and message. And here it is my feedback form. So contact form uses post method. HTTP post method to send this data. Okay. So now let's see that in action. So yeah, that's what we discussed. So these are what are the form elements. You will be having text, email, password, checkbox, radio button, everything. All these things can be form of form elements, and these are the attributes. As I have shown you, I need to use uh, post method, HTTP post method, because I'm creating a post here. I'm creating data and sending to the server. So that's why here you need to use HTTP post method, and then I have a submit button where I will be submitting the data. Okay. So yeah, just for information, you should not use get method here, because sending get information you can also do like this, but this is not a nice practice. Sending a query, if the form is big, you can't put everything in the URL. Okay. So what is the advantage of the post method? Post method means you don't need to send all the query in the URL. Rather, you can send it as a form of a body, and the body is not visible to everyone. So this is a very good use case where you can send information to the server without exposing the data at the URL page. Okay. So yes, yeah, how do you access the data from the server? Yes, you know request.form.get. This is used in the server to access data of the user request. So now let's see how a practical example on this. See, be careful here. I am using Flask, I am using render template, and I am using request. So what happens is, when user request slash contact, what happens is, since contact is a get method, okay, so it by default it loads contact form dot html. So it is a blank HTML page. Okay. So this blank HTML page will be loaded if user is requested for the route slash contact. Okay. Once he filled the data, name, email, message, what will happen is, he will click submit button. He will click submit button or send button. So at that point, one more request it will be coming from the client. So that is, this time it is a post request. So this time this method will be called. So we will be extracting all the details, and then we will be render a new template acknowledgement.html. Okay. So here two requests are happening. So first is you are sending a request uh, slash contact. Empty contact form will be loaded here. And the second request is you are sending the actual data. So at that time, post method is getting called to the server, and server receives all the data and send the acknowledgement back to the client. Okay. So let's run that example so you will understand what I am talking. So let's go here. Yeah. So let me come out of this. So let me clear the screen. Okay. I am running this example one. Yeah. So I will be calling this route contact. Okay. So this is the empty form. So at this point, this particular method is called, get method is called. So that's why I'm not seeing any acknowledgement.html. So I'm just, the server is returning the empty contact form here. Okay. So this is the empty contact form. So now let's start. So I will add my details like Fanendra, and then I'll put my email. Okay. And I will message, welcome to Gen AI course. Okay. So now upon clicking this button, what happens is, as we send, what is the action? It will send a post request to the server as in the HTML code. And this contact form is also using a style sheet contact form.css. So now if I click send, so what should happen? So actually this post method will call, and then this acknowledgement.html file should be rendered onto the screen. Let's see. Yeah. See, so this message is coming from server. So server is able to receive my name. Server is able to, I have sent to the server my email, and I have sent my message also. So all this information is sent to server, and server is responding back like this. Okay. So how that response is happening? Yes, using this render template acknowledgement.html. So to this to this acknowledgement.html, what we are passing? We are passing name, we are passing email, we are passing message. So how does this acknowledgement form looks like? Yes, this is the acknowledgement form. So you will be receiving the name, email, and the message. So using this will be getting printed, this response. Okay. So this is a very good example actually. So you have a form, contact form, and you are sending the data to the web server, and the web server is sending back you the response. So now I can also go back to my empty form also. Again, I can fill data. So you can use this form. This is kind of a login. So now let's look into one more example. So let me start stopping this server, and then yeah. So what is happening in the other example, example 2? So here also we have multi-step forms. What happens here is, here I am using a one more class called URL4. So let's see. See, here I am calling a route slash feedback, and first by default when user clicks this route, an empty feedback form is returned. Okay. So this is how it is written. So in this feedback form, what I will do, I will fill the details. So I will fill the name, rating. So this is the empty feedback form. So I will fill all these details, my name and what is the rating, excellent, good, and the comment. So I will put all the details and I will click submit button. So at that point, what happens? Here I am putting a post, okay, which means HTTP post method I am calling it. So now web server will read all the data, and then this is just, I'm putting like comments like what happens after reading the data. I will just put that into database. So here I am using, after reading this data, you redirect me to this thank you page. Okay. See, here I am rendering it onto the screen. So there is a one more way, redirect URL for thank you. So this particular message, so this particular function will call thank you, and this thank you function is rendering the HTML page. So indirectly I am getting the argument's name, and then I'm passing my that name to the thank you.html. Okay. So let's start running this example. Okay. So what is the route here? So I'm just clicking this. Yeah, because the route method is slash feedback. So let's use here slash feedback. Okay. So this is my empty feedback form. So this is my empty feedback form loaded here. So what happened is, I got the get request, and the server is loading, rendering the empty feedback form. Okay. So now let's see what is happening. I'll tell name is funny, and the rating is good. Comment is, I will put excellent. Okay. So now let's submit the feedback. So what happens if I submit the feedback? So after submitting the feedback, it is a post. It is a HTTP post submit feed. Okay. So this post method is get called. So this post method will call this thank you dot method, and this thank you dot method will render the web page, or the render the screen with the name. Okay. So let's see that in action. So submit. Yep. So it says thank you funny, we appreciate your feedback, your message has been received. Yeah. And submit another feedback if you click. So this is what happening. So thank you.html, if you open this thank you.html, here you can see we appreciate your feedback, my name is passed to this HTML page, and this is rendered onto the screen. Okay. So using Flask, you can create Flask server, as well as you can design UI also, or you can integrate HTML, CSS, and JavaScripts into the Flask project. Like you need to put like templates and load all the HTMLs here, and you need to render this onto the screen using Jinja render, and then you can use it. Okay. So you can also send requests to that server. You can use post methods, you can use forms, and you can just like a typical web application interaction between the client and the server. Okay. So that's about the rendering forms using Flask. Now let's look into how to handle a REST API request in Flask server. So what is a REST API? So it is called as representation state transfer. We have already discussed this. So it is nothing but a sequential and more structured way of sending a HTTP request. So here we will be sending get API slash users. So which represents get all users. Okay. So as you know already seen HTTP raw request. So there will be a request line, there will be headers, there will be body. So there will be you will be sending a HTTP request in a more structured way. In the earlier example here, so here also you are sending a request, but this is like normal HTTP request, not packaged as a REST API request. Okay. So here we will be seeing how to handle. So if a client sends a REST API request, how does Flask server needs to handle? So first we need to ensure the Flask server should able to receive that request and should able to send the response back. So for that you need to import Flask and JSONify and request. So yeah, here is my temporary database I am creating. User IDs, I have two IDs, 1, 2, and I have name, alias, and their corresponding email. So this is the database of two users. So let's say I want to have list of all users, and I got it. Let's say user requested one API request. So for example, if user requested curl localhost, I will mention what is curl. Yeah, slash API users. So if a user sends a request like this, what will happen is this particular route is called API slash users, and we are mentioning this is a get method. So you're telling JSONify of users slash status. We are telling because a REST API response, it is expecting a JSON. Okay, since it is a API request, so we need to ensure okay you're sending the response back as a JSON. Same like if user requests one particular user ID information, you need to send that as a form of JSON, and if there is error, you need to tell user not found. And this is how to create a user. So here I'm telling new user is equal to ID, and I'm trying to expand this database now. Okay, so ID will be now 3, next ID. So I will be creating a user here. So I'm just appending, updating here. Okay, so next is put. So here what happens is we are updating a specific user ID information here. Okay, so let's see that example also. So and finally I'm deleting a specific user. Okay, so here I'm performing CRUD operations. So I'm creating, I am reading, I'm creating, and I'm updating, and I'm deleting. So all the HTTP methods I'm using. So I'm using get, post, put, delete. See, this code is a web server code or a Flask server code. If any application is sending a user request in the form of a REST API or in the more structured format, your Flask server code needs to be written in such a way it should handle those REST API requests. Okay, so this is how you write the code for it, and yeah, you can go through it. This is bit all straightforward. The main thing is focus on the routes. So now, so in order to test whether my REST API is functioning properly or not, so rather than testing it from a web application, so I will be testing with the help of a CURL command line. So that is also a client URL. So this is one way of testing your REST API. So this is a REST API. So as we discussed, REST API contains body, request line, which contains HTTP and route path. So same here, this is a one more REST API request. It contains the path as well as the HTTP request, and this is a more precise way of, this is a more precise HTTP request. So what I'm telling is what is my HTTP method, and what is the request line, and what are my headers, and what is the body. So this is a more structured way of a REST API request or a raw HTTP request. So this you are sending this to the server using command line URL, CURL. I am not testing this from a web application. So let's see that in action. So like that I am doing all the CRUD operations, or I am creating REST API support mechanism for my Flask server. Okay. So you open the command line now. Okay. So just you can you don't specifically need to do it from here. You can also do from here. You can just open command line and just type curl. So this is the first command to get a list of all users. So this is nothing but a command line web application. See URL. So what happens here? Okay, it failed to connect because my server is not running. So first let's start running the server. Okay. Okay. So here my web server or Flask server is running. Okay. So now I am talking to the server using a command line web application or command line URL called C URL. So let's run this command again. See, I am getting all the list of the users. Okay. So this request is get this particular route is called and all the users are getting returned. So how to call a specific user? Okay. So user slash one. So what is the one? Allies. Let's see. Yes. See, I'm able to get user information of a specific. So this response is coming from our Flask's web server, which supports REST API also now. Okay. So now let's run one more method. So which is we'll run. We have seen these two. One is get all the users and one is get to specific user. So now let's see how to add user here. Okay. So let's see that now. So okay. So okay, this is post. Yeah, this is the exact command. So API slash users. So what is the request? HTTP body, HTTP method, request inline, headers, and then the actual content. So I'm creating a new user called Charlie, which is not there here in the users, database users. So let's create that. So this is a dummy database. Okay. So now let's see the list of all users now. See, now I created a new user Charlie and I'm able to get that new user here. So now let's update actually. So let's see. Okay. So it is not post, it is put. Yeah, this is not the command. Yeah, this is the exact. Okay. So what happens here is I am sending one more request here put. So here what I am telling update the user allies, update his email ID. So let's see that how to update the email ID. So in the body I'm mentioning again the same HTTP method, request line, headers, and the type. So headers and the actual body. In the body I'm mentioning what information I need to send. In the headers I'm telling content type is application.json. It means I am sending a JSON request and I am expecting a JSON response. Okay. So let's run this. Yes. So I got the response. It is telling allies@new.com is my new email. So earlier it is allies@example.com. So now let's see all the users again. Okay. Again, I have three users, but for the first user, I have updated the email ID. So let's see one more CRUD operation called delete user. So here I am using deleting user ID 1. User ID 1 is allies. So let's give that delete command also now. Yep, delete, this is the delete command. So after entering this, yep, so the user is deleted. So now let's cross check that. Yes, again I am with only two users. User 1 got deleted. Okay. See what here I am doing, I will just explain again. See, this is my, in this, I am running a Flask web server as you have seen throughout this video. So I need to talk to the server. So to talk to the server, I can just go to a local host and then just open it as we are doing. But since it is tough to send a REST API request from a web application. Okay. So you need to, in real world examples, there will be certain mechanism how to send that behind the scenes, but from the concept point of view I'm just trying to let you know how to send a REST API request. Okay, so this REST API request is sent using from a client application called CURL, command line URL or CURL curl. In general we will call this as a curl request. Okay, you can also use Postman also, but I'm for simplicity I'm using curl. So it means from Windows command line I'm talking to my server using command line instead of web application here. Okay, so don't get confused. CURL is a kind of a command line tool which is used to talk to the server. So I'm doing all the CRUD operations using from the command line itself, and I'm confirming all the operations are correct. Okay, so that's about how to ensure your REST API request is handled properly and your Flask server is able to handle all the REST APIs, create, request, put, and then delete. Okay, so that's all about the Flask basics.